Hi there. Good afternoon. I'm John Smith. I'm the director of the RISD Museum, and it's an honor to welcome everyone here today to hear our distinguished lecturer, Dr. Peju Layiwola, who will share her expertise in the history of bronze casting in Benin, the legacy of the 1897 punitive expedition, and the fight for restitution. The museum is pleased to host her visit in collaboration with RISD's Office of Social Equity and Inclusion, along with the Departments of Sculpture and the Theory and History of Art and Design. And I also want to offer particular thanks to Balaji Campbell, professor in RISD's Theory and History of Art and Design Department, and the museum's faculty fellow, Dr. Elon Cook, who's also in RISD's THAD department, for their role in assisting in Dr. Layiwola's visit. Dr. Peju Layiwola is a renowned and widely exhibited artist and a professor of art history and the head of the Department of Creative Arts at the University of Lagos in Nigeria. She earned her BA at the University of Benin in Benin City and her MA and PhD in art history at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. Dr. Layiwola's work as an artist in a variety of media, ranging from metalwork and pottery to textile and sculpture, addresses diverse strains of the post-colonial condition. She focuses on personal communal histories which centralize Benin as both an ancient kingdom and a contemporary city. In her teaching, writing, and artwork, there is a continuous engagement with themes of artifact pillage, repatriation and restitution, history, memory, and cultural imagination, gender and cultural heterodoxy, and the continually mutable process of production. Her work moves from the emotive space of art pillage in Africa, captured in previous solo exhibitions, Benin 1897.com, Art and the Restitution Question in 2010, and Return Raw in 2018, into other forms of engagement with cloth and its multiple significations. Through the nonprofit organization Women and Youth and Art Foundation, Dr. Layiwola founded in 1994, she has instituted practical interventions and initiated new pedagogical methods that extend beyond the academy and into local communities. As many of you know, the RISD Museum holds an important Benin bronze, head of a king, made in West Africa in the 1700s. And as the museum confronts our object's egregious history, as well as its future, having Dr. Layiwola here to share her expertise as an artist and scholar is especially important. And I invite you to join her, along with members of the museum staff, in the museum's fifth floor galleries tomorrow at noon for a conversation about the process of repatriating this work. So now please join me in welcoming Dr. Peju Layiwola.
Wow, it's a full house. I'd like to start by thanking Professor Elon Cook, Bolaji Campbell, Deborah, Sarah, and all the members of staff of RISD who have made it possible for me to speak at this forum on the topic, Making Meaning from a Fragmented Past, 1897 and the Creative Process. This title is taken from an earlier article published in 2014 based on the creative expressions of artists who have engaged with the theme of the plundering of Benin City, Nigeria in 1897. I'm excited to have in the audience Professor Jim Bogatti, a renowned art historian and a longtime friend. She flew in from Cambridge, UK to be here. And my son, Obatola, who flew in from South Dakota. He considers this a great privilege to visit RISD, a school where he hopes to continue his graduate studies in film and videography. I have tailored this lecture in line with my discussions with Professor Bolaji Campbell and Elon Cook, and I hope this will also capture the interest of both staff and students of this great institution. I'd like to state that the views that I express here are mine. I'm not speaking as a representative of the Benin royal family. I'll be talking about my work as an artist whose early exhibitions engaged with the plundering of Benin objects. You will agree with me that a lot is going on in the news about how to manage misappropriated cultural objects from many parts of Africa. It has therefore become more uncomfortable for holders of looted objects violently removed from their countries of origin to continue to gloss over provenance and ownership of plundered objects. I have structured my paper into 3 parts. The first part will look at 2 of my artistic engagements with Benin art and history, Benin1897.com, Art and the Restitution Question, a solo exhibition, and a public art project titled Whose Centenary. The second part will discuss my mother's art, how my mother's art connects with the sacred art of bronze casting in Benin, and to peep into the history of bronze casting as an art in Benin City. The concluding segment of my paper will look at the return of Benin objects made in 2014, the Benin Dialogue Proposal, and the Benin Head in the RISD Museum Collection, which was accessioned in 1939. Tomorrow, I'll be interested in learning how far the negotiations for the return of this bronze head have gone. Benin is located in the southern part of Nigeria and should not be confused with Benin, the country, which used to be known as Dahomey. It was a vast kingdom ruled by an all-powerful king. Today, the line of kingship remains. The king, or Oba, is a religious and traditional ruler of the Edo people of Benin. 1897 is a date that in many ways defines the discourse on Benin. In fact, Joseph Nevadomsky says that 1897 is the terminus adquem. And about 4,000 works of art in brass, in ivory, beads, wood were looted from the palace of the king by British soldiers. These works were carted away to Europe, where they were sold to offset the cost of the expedition. The king, His Royal Majesty Oba Ovorame, was then exiled to Calabar, where he died in 1914. During the attack on Benin, British soldiers opened fire on Benin defenders who fell like nuts from the top of trees. This is the context of the removal of these exquisite Benin objects that we find in foreign museums today. Here in the US, they can be found here in RISD, also in Seattle Museum, at the Metropolitan, and in many other collections yet to be discovered. This episode in history has been a source of reference by artists in various genres. Most recent and well-known is the blockbuster movie Black Panther, which refers to theft of cultural heritage materials from Africa. Beyond the Benin experience, many other African countries have experienced one form of looting or another. The Battle of Magdala in 1968, a large number of gold crowns, chalices, manuscripts, jewelry, were looted from Ethiopia, and today they can be found in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. The scale of theft was so monumental that it took about 15 elephants and 200 mules to cart away the items. 1874, Ashanti, Ghana. British soldiers invade the Ashanti kingdom of Kumasi and carted away exquisite gold objects. Again, they can be found in the same museum. In 2005, I was invited to participate in a research project titled Broken Memory, initiated by a Paris-based anthropologist, Bernard Moulet. This project explored the impact of the removal of sacred objects on the people and communities from where these objects were plundered. My survey was carried out amongst the bronze casters in Benin, the descendants of those who produced the Benin objects found in foreign museums today. They spoke of how they now resort to copying images from books and catalogs and had no opportunity of seeing these looted works as they do not have funds for international travel. Soon after, I was invited to write an essay for the catalog, Benin Kings and Rituals. It was a traveling exhibition that moved from Vienna to Paris, Berlin, and Chicago. Benin looted objects came on the news again. The opening of this show in Vienna was full of pomp and pageantry. About 300 Benin objects lent by some museums in Europe and America and they were on display in the newly renovated museum galleries. European visitors looked at the works with relish. The artistry and exquisite nature of the works were the main interest of the European art connoisseurs. On the other hand, two brothers of the King of Benin, whose heirloom it was that was stolen, were also at the event. One of them, His Royal Highness Prince Edo Akenzua, the Enogi of Abazua, remarked that he felt a great sense of nostalgia looking at the objects which were taken from the bedchamber and palace of his great-grandfather, Obavorame. Their feeling contrasted with those of their European counterparts. The Benin royals were seeing these objects for the first time, objects that had been in Europe and America for well over a century. His Royal Majesty, Oba Eridawa, wrote in the exhibition catalogue, and I quote, "It's our prayer that the people and the government of Austria will show humaneness and magnanimity and return to us some of these objects who found their way to their country," end of quote. I returned to Nigeria after viewing the Vienna and Chicago exhibitions with a resolve to do more work that will engage with this history and to contribute to the ongoing discourse about the ownership of contested Benin patrimony, a heritage which I am connected through matrilineal lines. In 2010, my solo exhibition, 1897.com, Art and the Restitution Question, opened. The name Benin1897.com refers to Benin as the location, 1897 the date, and .com, like the domain name, commercial, underlines commerce as the main reason Benin was sacked. The Benin monarch restricted trade to the irritation of the British, which led to friction, an ambush, and eventual sack of the city. It also refers to the commodification of Benin objects on the international market. Works which sold for a few pounds at the turn of the century now attract millions of dollars on the international market with no recourse to Nigeria or to the Oba of Benin. I was concerned about issues regarding copyright, identity, and ownership of Benin objects. What does it mean, for example, to pay reproduction rights to publish a photograph of a work that was stolen from your country? Also, what does it mean to teach about your culture from the outside when you visit a foreign museum? In terms of documentation, I thought it was important to bring scholars from Africa together to represent their views on a subject that is dear to the hearts of many. The foreword was written by His Royal Majesty Oba Eridawa, and the book also contained a lot of appendices about letters that were written between members of the royal family requesting for the objects from museums. And of course, a very popular request for a Benin bronze pectoral mask, which represents the Queen Mother, Yoba Esige, a work that was sold to the British Museum in 1909 by Ralph Moore, the British Commissioner and Consul for the Niger Coast Protectorate. The mask was chosen as the emblem of the cultural festival in Nigeria, the Second World Black Festival of Arts and Culture, FESTAC, in 1977. The Nigerian government requested for the work to be loaned to Nigeria, but this request was turned down on conservation grounds. And I will say that I don't think that by the time the Nigerian government requested for this work, that they were aware that other works of this kind were in other museums in Seattle, in Metropolitan, in Stuttgart. They only looked towards the British Museum, and they requested for the mask in their collection. Now we'll go on to look at the works from my exhibition. And the first one is 1897.com, the title piece of the exhibition, which comprised about 1,000 terracotta heads. Now, if you look at most of the text, you find that it's written between 2,500 to 4,000 heads or bronze works were looted from Benin. So the exact number is not known. But for me as an artist, it was enough for me to have 1,000 heads which covered the entire gallery floor. And that showed the scale of the theft that went on in Benin. And of course, we'll come back to look at the symbolism, what these heads represent in the culture. So I have another slide here which shows you a section of the works, close-up of some of the heads. And the other slide here talks about, captures a historical moment. When the British soldiers came into And the palace, they laid siege for 3 days, and on the third day, the palace was set ablaze, and some of the works actually were burnt during that inferno. And some of the ivories still have signs of the burn marks that you find in the museum today. So this was actually a reference to that historical episode, apart from the fact that I was also looking towards creating some kind of variety in the display of the installation, introducing oxides to the terracotta heads. It was also a reference to what I just talked about. Another work, Checkered History, draws on the textures of several Benin bronze plaques and employs the motifs and textures found on them. And they were arranged like a checkered board. Africa became like a chessboard, like a checkered board, a playground for colonial powers. And this is very similar in terms of the meaning to the work by Yinka Shonibari, another Nigerian artist who did a work titled Scramble for Africa, with a reference to how Africa was divided between colonial powers during the Berlin Conference. The Theater of War shows terracotta slides providing information about particular events recorded by the British soldiers as they made their way into Benin, the number of villages that were burned, the kind of commands that went from Nigeria to the Home Office, asking for more reinforcement, number of ammunitions that were expended, the number of people that were killed, and all of these were documented looking at the archives by the British soldiers themselves. And then another work, which is an installation titled Long Live the King, was a way of commemorating the life of kings in Benin. It was a new way of doing so. And I used the gourds, calabashes, which is usually identified as a receptacle for storing sacrificial items in service of the Almighty. And here I had about 113 gourds, each gourd, symbolizing the time a year since the expedition occurred. And remember that this was done in 2010. I also tried to paint out some of the symbols that are associated with particular kings in Benin. And I took the cloth that you see on the other side of the slide. It's a cloth that was designed by my mother to mark the funeral of her father Oba Kenzo II in 1978. So I painted some of the patterns from that cloth onto the calabash and installed it in this manner. Now we'll go on to the second project, which is titled Whose Centenary Project, and it was held in December 2014. It provided other artists the opportunities to lend ideas to this new body of work. It was a public art project held at Igun Street, and Igun Street is the home and ateliers of the bronze casters. This project questioned why the Nigerian state celebrated the centenary of the amalgamation of the southern and northern protectorate of Nigeria in a grand way. 2014 was also the centenary year of the passing of the exiled Benin monarch. So we had reason enough to return to Benin as a site of commemoration. The project yielded works in new media, in performance, installation, painting, poetry, and photography. And we had about 11 artists who were invited to take part and to articulate, to create projects that would, look at this theme. And we had really a very wonderful time. The first artist, Jelili Atiku, who incidentally was here in Providence for a year. He was in Brown University for a year. A very famous performance artist in Nigeria, raised an altar to commemorate the passing of Oba Ovorame, the king of Benin, who stood against British imperialism in the defense of his kingdom. And interestingly, what he did here was to celebrate the king in a different way, in a Christian way. But he discarded all the crucifixes and all the symbols of Christianity and picked on the Unlao, which is the head of the king, and used that as a symbol of his church. So there you see a mat which he put out there, and these are his converts. He was inviting people as he moved along the streets, giving them hymnals and invitation cards to come for his service which he created, which he had on a plot along Igun Street, which doubles as a crusade ground and also a place where the casters pour in their metal for casting. So this was quite interesting to see. And then we also had an artist, Victor Hekameno, who did an on-site installation painting in the palace of the head of the Guild of Casters. We had Andrew Esebo and a Portuguese photographer who did a collaborative work. They looked in the archives, 1974, a house that was snapped in 1974 at Igun Street, and they put it alongside another photograph they took in 2014 and found people who were in the photograph in 1974 in the same house in 2014. And I thought this was very exciting. Another artist, Tayo Idaho, engaged the hair coiffure of Edo women and had gone further to develop this theme in her work, showing a number of these paintings and collage work at the Zait Museum when it opened in South Africa. Then Wura Natasha Ogunji, an African-American artist who now spends a lot of time in Nigeria, performed Queen Sweep, which was a way of getting rid of the detritus of colonialism. And she made swift and rhythmic movements as she swept the streets of Benin. Burns Effium belonged to the family who took care of the exiled king while in Calabar. This for him was more than a performance. Indeed, he came on the project as a way of pledging support and re-establishing the link, the long-lasting link, which his family had had with the Benin monarchy. And he used the umbrella as a symbol of protection and nurture. And from the umbrella, he strung photographs of houses where Oba Voram had lived in Calabar when he was exiled. We also had another artist, a poet, Jumoke Verissimo, who performed her song titled No Answer, telling of how the requests for the return of Benin objects have fallen on deaf ears. Elizabeth Liu, my mother, did an earlier performance with Wura Natasha Ogunji. And in this performance, she tried to bring back, she was celebrating the return of Wura, like every other person who had left Nigeria or left Africa, back to Africa. So she dressed her up like a Benin princess. And as you can see in the photograph, Wura really enjoyed this performance. Another photograph of Wura and my mother. And then at the background, you can find Verissimo performing her poem. So this brings me to my mother, Princess Elizabeth Liu, born in 1939 to Oba Kenzwa II, who reigned between 1933 and 1978, and Queen Eyoba Edeao Akenzwa. She grew up in the palace and was inspired by the court artists who were constantly involved in making objects to glorify the king and to adorn the shrines. She started off making mud sculptures similar to the tableau of human sculptures she saw on the altars in the palace. She also assisted her mother, who was also a very talented woman. Her mother designed and made parts of the royal regalia for her husband, the king. Olowu taught art for several years in many secondary schools in Benin. In the mid-1960s, she worked with a blacksmith whose studio was opposite one of the colleges where she taught art. He specialized in making small bells used for worship. This was her first encounter with metal casting. Elizabeth Liu was admitted to study sculpture at the University of Benin in 1976. She was one of the first set of 4 students admitted into the Benin Art School. She became the first female bronze caster to work in a medium that was the exclusive preserve of males in Benin society. It was taboo for women to smelt metal in Benin. They were not allowed into the foundry as it was believed that they would pollute the tools of the trade and cause failure during the process of casting. Her father, Oba Kenzwa II, gave her royal prerogative. He asked the bronze casters to allow her access to her foundry and knowledge about the arts. She recollects, and I quote, "My father believed that women should not be limited in any way and should be given a chance to excel. Oba Kenzwa was known to have sent his daughters to the best schools in Nigeria. He also gave them lots of landed property to support them economically." Edo society celebrated women in many ways, yet at the same time exhibited some cultural practices that appeared oppressive. There were glorious stories of great women in Benin, such as Queen Idia. Queen Idia was the mother of Oba Esige, who reigned from 1504 to 1550 AD. She played a very significant role in sustaining the throne for her son, and when she died, the king instituted the title of Iyoba, or Queen Mother, in her honor. Olowu focused on the female form in her attempt to make more visible females in contemporary society. One particular work that alludes to this is a cement statuary titled Akada, done in 1978. This work speaks of the transformative power of education to the life of a young girl. Some of her works are autobiographical, and as a young girl, she was always seen reading a book and was nicknamed Akada, which means bookworm. I remember posing for my mother while she made this sculpture, which is one of the oldest sculptures from the Benin University Art School. She grew up learning about the cultural values of the Edo society. She understood the language and the culture of her people. Over time, her works increasingly became focused on the female form, the woman as mother, the woman as caregiver, and in the early 1980s, she made a series of diminutive sculptures which she titled Mother of Many. Edo society focused on the importance of children as well. Women were recognized in society only when they had children. A woman was greatly honored if she was married. And if she had children and was able to live with her husband throughout life, she was also seen as very successful and was recognized. Her sculptures also depicted women in various stages of pregnancy. 0 hour was a popular theme. She made sculptures of this title in cement and bronze. And she told about the travels women go through at the point of delivery. Some of her works also inspired mine. I was happy to copy her work, and I think this is actually legitimate. And began gradually to, deviate, evolving my own style. And you can see here the stylistic similarities between her work titled Fourth Month, my work titled Fourth Month, and her work titled Mother of Many. A few other sculptures which inspired my own work were titled Polygyny, 2 women married to the same man. The woman sees them as same, so they look identical. But these are very separate women, very different. But because they struggle for the same man, they seem to fall out quite often. And here they are sitting back to back. And then the quest for water. I was happy to be known as a bronze caster. I was basking in the fame of a mother who had broken tradition. I wanted all my works to be made of bronze, and I felt that this was the only path to success. So we'll go on to Igun Street. Returning to Igun Street for the public art project was a way of recognizing the invaluable work the casters had been doing in promoting the art and culture of the Edo people. For my mother, it took her back to a familiar space, and it brought back a flood of memories. Bronze casting was introduced about the 14th century, and the history is that a man came from Ife to teach the people of Benin bronze casting, and the name is Igwegai. Actually, the man left, but he left a son behind called Igwegai. And Igwegai taught the people of Benin how to cast in bronze. But interestingly, the art of bronze casting continues in Benin, while it has stopped a long time in Ife. But we all know that Ife predates Benin in terms of the age of the material. Now, the art was passed on from father to son within a lineage. There were several lineages, but the lineages were headed by the head of the guild that is known as Ineni Guen. And there were several guilds, but the guild of bronze casting was the most important. In fact, they took oath of allegiance. They were not meant to teach anybody outside of the lineage the art of bronze casting. And if you go to Benin today, you find that the casters are still along Igun Street casting, and they pass on the skills to their sons, even though the females, from my own finding, know how to cast bronze, but never indulge in it because of the taboos that exist in Benin, that women are not allowed to cast in metal. But they learn how to do that. They are involved in getting the fuel wood. They are involved in getting the beeswax. They see all the processes of production, but they don't indulge in making the arts. So the Who Centenary Project brought about a new and rare form of collaboration between Edo-trained artists and academically trained artists who work together on a single project. This could not have occurred several decades before because of the age-long tradition, the restrictions and the secrecy attached to the art of bronze casting. My installation, which featured in 2010, was installed in a rustic space along the corridors of the head of the guild, in Igun Street, rather than a white cube. as it was in Lagos when I first installed it. For me, it was transformed by the inclusion of the works of the bronze casters. The casters readily put in some of their best works into the installation. For me, this synergy was very important, but more important was the idea of physically taking the works back to Benin. So we see a view of it, an aerial view, and another view. And here we find a woman looking at the works, and I also look at the child behind her back. And I'm wondering what she would tell the child, because the story about the expedition is very well known in Benin. So people pass it on from father to son, mother to daughter. It's really very well known. So I'm imagining the kind of story she will be telling her daughter when she's old enough to understand what is going on. We must change the narrative. So we'll go on to the return of 2 Benin bronze objects in 2014. In 2014, Adrian Walker, son of Captain Walker, who had been a spy attached to the expeditionary forces that attacked Benin in 1897, decided to return 2 bronze works, a gong and a bird, directly to His Royal Majesty Oba Erediawa. He felt that if he coveted these works so much, he wondered how those who truly owned the bronze works felt. He also resolved that he needed to take these works to make the return to the very place where his father had committed this atrocity in 1897. So he took it to Benin, and he returned the 2 works to the Oba of Benin amidst a lot of celebration in the palace. Adrian Walker went further in his restitution to share, give a copy of his diary to the king, where his grandfather had written about 3 entries describing the activity of taking those works as looting. The king also gave him bronze gifts in exchange for the 2 items that he returned. And those are the 2 items that the king gave him as gifts. And Adrian predicted that he thinks that many more looted objects will be returned. So I'm going to show you a very short clip, because it's better for you to hear it from the horse's mouth rather than my own mouth, what Adrian Walker said.
Still a struggle to achieve our shared aim of getting more of these bronzes back to where they belong. If you ask the British Museum, they will say, well, they're only custodians. If you ask the politicians, they say it's the business of the British Museum. So we go round in a circle. We need to persuade not just the British public, but the international community as a whole that it is unethical and, if you like, immoral to be holding on to items which were not legally acquired. And to this end, I think this event...
I think I'll stop it there for time. Now, the Benin Dialogue Group. They began their meetings 8 years ago. This was 3 years after the Benin exhibition, which opened in Vienna. It was largely conceived by a former director of museums in Nigeria, Mayo Adejiro, and the curator of the Benin Kings and Rituals, Barbara Plackesteiner. It was a response to addressing the complaints that this important exhibition did not travel to Nigeria. The topic at the inception of this dialogue was new cultures of collaboration, sharing of collections, and quest for restitution. After 5 meetings held in Vienna, Berlin, Benin City, Cambridge, and Leiden, there had been a systematic removal of the request for restitution. The museum curators have insisted that the issue of restitution does not lie within their purview, and indeed, questions of returns are bilateral issues, best addressed by individual museums within their national system of governance. In a recent article titled Benin Royal Museum, 3 steps forward, 6 steps back, by Folarin Shillon, one of the members of this group, he lamented the removal of the restitution clause, which he says is a repudiation of one of the initial objectives of the group when it was set up. Shillon goes on to state, and I quote, "The issue of return or loan is always a bilateral matter, either between the sovereign state making the making the request, and the museum, be it a state museum or private museum, holding the objects, end of quote. The Benin Dialogue discussions advocates for the loan of Benin objects to a planned Benin Royal Museum, which is to be built by the Edo State government in the next 3 years. The participating museums are emphasizing on, in quotes, contributing objects rather than outright returns. They also agree to waive reproduction rights or reproduction fees, assist with expertise, and support for curatorial education. Kwame Okpoku, who is someone that has been writing very strongly about this issue of repatriation and restitution, criticizes this initiative and wonders how such, and I quote, a ridiculous and insulting proposal can be accepted by any African. When viewed against the Macron Declaration, which is unconditional, we begin to see that the long-drawn Benin Dialogue Group discussions do not adequately serve the interests of those clamoring for the return of Benin heritage materials. We end today's discussions on the head in the RISD collection, which I titled More Than a Single Head, and More Than a Single Story. And to add that it is gratifying to know that the authorities are contemplating a return of the Benin head. The head was used as a commemorative sculpture placed on a palace shrine to venerate one of the past kings of Benin. Smooth Ugochukwu, an art historian, captures the essence of this ritual object and the significance of the head as a site of power and worship in African traditional religion. And there were many of these idealized heads which did not represent any particular Oba. They were made in various styles, some with more elaborate crowns and others with flanges at the bottom. It was only the king that had the right to have a bronze head. The high chiefs could only use wooden heads on their shrines. The head, or the ancestral head, sometimes referred to as memorial head, is in Benin known as unlao, and is made using the lost wax technique of casting. And I just showed a few photographs. Luckily, these photographs, I got them from Jean Bugatti. Thank you very much. Some of the photographs she took in the Gun Street during the casting. During casting operations. On the one hand, what they do basically is to create a core. They create a core, an inner core, which is made of laterite soil. And then they smoothen it out, which is a rough sketch of what they want to build. And then they build an outer layer of wax, very detailed. But then they insert core pins to hold the wax layer to the core. And then they create a network of sprues and air vents, invest the entire material with laterite again, and that layer of laterite. And that's what we see here on the slide. So they've subjected to some heat to melt the wax. The wax runs out, and then they fire it to a higher temperature to receive the molten metal. On this slide, you see metal being poured into the mold. And when it is cool, they break the mold to reveal the cast. Some of the heads look very alike. But this technique of casting, for every Benin work you find in a museum, it's an original piece. They didn't have the technology of having silicone rubbers like you have now to cast several wax models. So every work was invested separately and every mold was expendable. So sometimes you find that the heads are very similar. And while I was preparing to come for this talk, I saw an article in West Africa, 1973, where another head looks very similar to what you have here at the museum. But this was sold in 1973 at Sotheby auction, and I think it was about £12,000. But very similar to what you have. But these are all original pieces. And during the coronation of the new king in Benin, Obayewai, we had some of the heads on the stage where he sat, and in a sense, almost like saying that this is, having support from his ancestors as well. So the heads are also really very functional in this regard. In terms of the symbolism, we have the coronet, the crown, made of coral beads. Coral beads are really very significant in Benin. And when the casters did a work that was really very good, and the king was very impressed, he would give a string of coral beads to honor the caster. The king will give you beads to honor you. And you have 2 clusters of beads on the side. And this is known as ititiako. Ititiako Ako is a pepper fruit, it's a fruit in Benin. And these rosettes, as is described, sometimes are found even on the hairdo of the princesses and Queen Mother. The Ako, which is a pepper fruit, it's clustered in that form and it's very similar. But I don't know if this is called Ichitiako because it just looks like the sponge, but I know that Ichitiako itself, the Ako fruit, is a tree that grows, takes an entire lifetime to grow. And in Benin, there's an adage that says that whoever plants an Ako tree never lives to eat of it because it takes the entire lifetime. So in a sense, it might be referring to longevity. And there's a crown, there's also a bead on the forehead. Some of the beads are lost from the one you have here in the museum. Well, I could go on and talk about it. I know that I'm running out of time. But I'd like to say once again, I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity of giving this talk. And through my talk, I've been able to point out that history does not always reside in the past. History is constantly with us. It defines our existence and invariably defines our future. Thank you very much for listening.
I just wanted to know how old the oldest Benin casting is and exactly what the origins of the art were, whether it was totally indigenous to Benin City or whether there were other influences from other parts of Nigeria.
Oh, should I respond to that directly? Oh, okay. I thought you were going to take more questions. Yeah. I love that. Oh, okay.
So I wanted to know, apart from the two objects that were repatriated by the descendant of one of the looters, has anything else been repatriated?
I didn't grasp the geographical parameters. You were explaining that Benin is a separate country from the Benin City area that you were describing in your talk. If you could clarify that a bit, it would be helpful.
Okay. Can I take these ones? Okay.
I just wanted to know, since the Macron unconditional declaration, if you've been part of any talks and how those talks have been shaped by that conversation.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll start with the last question. Yeah, I've not been part of any talk. I've not been part of talks after the Macron declaration. I have just presented my work as an artist. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not representing the Benin royal family. I can't even do that. So I know that there are quite a number of talks going on at the moment. I may not agree with all that they say, but I think it's a step in the right direction that people are beginning to think about returning works. It's also important that this discourse is opening out. It was almost anathema for you to talk about repatriation before. And I know that when I had my exhibition in 2010, people were wondering, why do you want to return those works to Benin? Why are you clamoring for that? It doesn't make any sense. We don't have museums and all of that. And I think that it wasn't really very open. It wasn't really an open discussion at that time. You were almost, looked scorned if you talked about, returning Benin objects or objects that were plundered from Africa, So it is gratifying to know that these discussions are going on, and I think that at some point, just like Adrian Walker had said, that he sees that this works will return in a short while. Then the Benin place, location, southern Nigeria. Sometimes when I give talks about Benin, people kind of confuse because it has the same name. That's French-speaking Benin, Benin. We call it Benin. That's where it is, outside of, just on the side of borders Nigeria. As you go on to Togo and Ghana, it used to be a very, prosperous kingdom of Dahomey. It's not Benin City in Nigeria, which I also indicated on the map here, because that's what we're talking about, not Benin Dahomey. Objects that were repatriated. Have there been other works repatriated to Nigeria beyond the two objects in 2014? I know that in 1936, the regalia of the king, Oba Ovorame, who was exiled, were returned to my grandfather, Oba Kenswa II, and it was said that he danced for joy when those items were given back to him. There had been repatriations done before, but not celebrated like we had the 2014. And I think because there's more awareness about what is going on. Now, the 2010 Sotheby sale, people clamored against it and it had to be taken down because people are more aware. The internet makes it more possible for you to know what's happening in all the nooks and crannies of this world. There have been auctions, like I pointed out, the 1973 auction. Nobody knew about that because it was in the papers. I stumbled upon that recently. But people didn't know about it. But anything that happens now, people are aware and they take action as soon as it does happen. Other influences, Benin, Ife is much older than Benin. 14th century, sometimes we refer to that, Benin, a lot of Benin works. I do not have access to the materials that are out here. So most of what I would depend on are texts that have been written about Benin history, which is very sad as an art historian coming from the continent. But there's also an older tradition of bronze casting in the eastern part of Nigeria, which dates to about 9th century AD, the Igbo-Ukwu culture. And they did a lot of casting, not just in brass, but also in bronze. So the Benin objects, even though they call them bronze cast, they're actually brass. But in Ife, you find that they had a lot of heads, but the heads were more naturalistic, more realistic than the heads that were done in Benin, which were mostly idealized. But there's a stream of connection between all of these three regions because they use the same technique of casting, which is a seripedi or lost wax technique of casting. Okay, 2 more questions, thank you.
Hi, I teach in the Jewelry and Metals department, and I was also really interested in this lost wax casting method, and I'm wondering how widely is it practiced today in the area, and also is it used also for smaller objects? I'm wondering about the scale, like in terms of maybe jewelry up to even very large objects.
Wonderful talk, by the way. I was wondering how perceptions or ideals of women in foundries have changed since you and your mother have kind of forged this path for women in metal.
Okay, again, I'll start with the last question. Yes, definitely. We have quite a number of women who are involved in casting. In Nigeria, we have quite a number of art schools where students specialize in sculpture. And in sculpture, you can work with all media. You can work with metal, you can work with cement, you can work with stone. So there's no restriction. But if you work within Benin itself, I think people are still very much intimidated by that tradition of casting. So you work within the university environment, you are kind of safe. But when you say you have a foundry, I haven't seen any woman who has said she has a foundry in Benin, beyond my mother, practicing art. So it's still a very traditional society where people really hold on to these values. And it hasn't quite changed dramatically within Benin itself. But all over Nigeria, in the various art schools, we have artists who are doing tremendous work, incredible work with all media. But sculpture has always been a field that a lot of females run away from, a field that is very tedious, very difficult to work. Metal, they rather go into painting. And so it's when you find a female doing that, people are like, oh, why are you doing sculpture? They want to ask questions about that. But things are really changing. And I would say that while I was in school at the University of Benin, we had 2 members of the cult, the guild, who were actually hired as assistants, studio hands, studio assistants, who were to teach us simple methods of casting, apart from the more modern techniques that our Ghanaian teacher taught us, using the centrifugal casting systems, sound casting systems, and all of that. So they were also involved in doing that, but they didn't think they were breaking any taboo because they were employed by the university. So we have casting going on in Benin today. Just before we came here, Jean was talking about some of the casts that she had acquired while she was teaching at the University of Benin, and how those works really looked very exquisite. So on the one hand, you have workshops that are doing really groundbreaking work, casting works that are much larger than the shrine objects that were stolen and taken away. They are doing monumental pieces, larger than life-size sculptures. Some of the sculptures, which are made in ephemeral materials, are being replaced now with bronze. But it's still the same old technique of Peju, which is, and then you find that the casters themselves, because of the scale of work, the fact that it's increasing in size, they have to improvise, get facilities on their own, create some kind of system for melting the metal that'll be faster because they're pouring, doing more pours. They have also evolved a way of improving on their age-old methods of making cords and mold. So I think that what we need to do, or what is needed to be done in Benin, is to update the technique so that it can actually cope with the demand of metal casting that is going on. Because now we have quite a number of people who are actually asking for bronze works to be kept in lobbies of hotels and banking halls, and I think that the artists are doing a lot to match up. Beyond the sculptures, you also have people who are doing jewelry. I studied jewelry and metal casting for my first degree. So I have that background. And in fact, when you get to see some of my prints, I use this knowledge of jewelry in making my prints as well. So we also learn how to work with silver, with gold, beyond bronze, and other precious materials. So we also learn all the modern techniques that's available to us in making our works as well. Yeah, fine.
I understand repatriation and where that's coming from, but here you're taking a priceless work of art and taking it, let's say, from the Metropolitan Museum or the RISD Museum, seen by the eyes of many, into Benin City or Benin, out into your country. How many people will enjoy that? And also, is Benin, a museum is really a repository of great things in perpetuity, hopefully. In Benin, say, how safe is it, your museum, to bring these priceless works that won't be seen by the major scholars in the field to go back there? So I think it's a double-edged sword, and I think it's not such a one-way process.
Thank you, Dr. Layiwola, for your presentation.
Thank you.
My question has to do with how you might describe yourself as an artist, a practicing artist, and your work in relation to memory and history. So if we consider 1897 to be a rupture for Edo people, how might you, thinking about your work, think about memory? Also, how would you describe other artists that you've encountered, both academic and non-academic artists, like the artists on Igun Street? How does their work relate to memory and history? Is this a rupture?
Well, I think we have to move away from this narrative of having more people to see the Benin objects on this side. I think we really have to change this narrative. We really need to do that. I consider myself a very important scholar in Nigeria, and I also have a right to hold and feel these objects as well. What makes you think that those objects are better placed here than elsewhere? There's nowhere in the world that is safe today. And we should not talk about these objects as if it is in the safest place. These objects have been here for over a century. People have been denied access to these works. People were also killed in the context of removing these works. And here we are saying that how many people are going to see them in Benin or in Nigeria? For crying out loud, Nigeria is the country that has the largest population of people, black people. So it will not be out of place to return it to a place where the works were removed. And like I said, we have to change this narrative. We We have to change the way we think if we must repair. If we must think about trying to correct the ills of the past. We must think about ways in which we think about things and put people on the same pedestal, not to think that we have a safe haven on this side. Yes, I, as a scholar, I have the opportunity of coming here, but I'm talking about people who I had worked with, who had complained about the fact that they want to connect with the works that their predecessors had done. They will never be able to come to reach the museum, for example, to look at the one piece that's here, or go to the Met, or go elsewhere. And I think that when you read about the kind of comments that are made in the West about these objects, is heart-rending, it's heartbreaking, and I think that we must change that perspective. In terms of rupture, memory and rupture, yes, I think, yes, the 1897 event, and when I first started, I talked about the fact that there's nothing you talk about in Benin that doesn't come back to 1897, talk about music. And if you read the article with the title, Making Meaning from a Fragmented Past, I talked about the works of a large number of artists who have engaged with the theme from Nigeria. But also you have African-American artists who are also engaging with this theme. Just a few days ago, 2 days ago, I was with Melvin Edwards, a very renowned African-American artist, who did a work, Return to Benin, 1995 piece. I didn't put it here in my work, but that's a work that you can also connect to that kind of history. So what also makes you think that people should not come back and see those works and make the kind of money that is being gathered by the museums in the publications of postcards, of books, and all the rest. So yeah, it's an exercise in memory. There's a rupture, but in my work, I've tried to see how we can move from that. So I've shown you a project that has engaged the history of Benin in a different way, but still using that as a starting point. Does that answer your question? Thank you.